Madam Speaker, with that, I would like to yield 3 minutes to my colleague from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the previous question and in support of this week's U-Cut item, the elimination of taxpayer subsidies to National Public Radio. National Public Radio's recent firing of longtime news analyst Juan Williams was a wake-up call for many Americans to political correctness and liberal bias at NPR. However, it's not the liberal bias that offends me so much as that American citizens are forced to subsidize it with their hard-earned tax dollars. Long before the Juan Williams fiasco, I sponsored legislation to pull the plug on taxpayer funding for NPR. I enjoy some programs on NPR, but I have long believed that it can stand on its own. The question is not the quality of programming on NPR. The question today is whether government programs and services that can be funded privately should be subsidized by taxpayers. As a country, we no longer have this luxury, if we ever did. With the national debt over $13 trillion, the government simply can't afford to continue funding non-essential services. Americans voted through the popular website U-Cut to place this proposal on the House floor for a vote today. The selection of this measure shows the American people's desire to rein in unnecessary spending. My proposal would prohibit federal dollars from going to NPR through any of the various federal grants they now access. I myself enjoy NPR programming, but why should Americans foot the bill for this when we have to borrow about 40 cents on every federal dollar? NPR local radio programs directly receive congressionally appropriated funds that reached over $65 million in 2010 alone. Plus, local stations directly receive grants from other federal sources, such as the National Endowment for the Arts. NPR stations then use these taxpayer dollars on licensing fees for NPR programming, which are then funneled back to NPR headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Taking this indirect funding into account, federal funds now make up an estimated 20% of NPR's annual budget. Let me be clear, this measure will not prohibit local stations from receiving any other funding. It will just prohibit them from using taxpayer money to acquire NPR programming. Unsustainable federal spending is a serious threat to the United States economy and to the future prosperity of the American people. Americans know this. We shouldn't wait until the 112th Congress to start solving this problem. Cutting spending begins now. We must begin the hard work of eliminating these deficits and creating jobs by making tough choices on spending today. The American people have asked Congress to put a stop to out-of-control spending. Millions of them voted through U-Cut that prohibiting federal funding of NPR is a good place to start. I urge my colleagues to heed the will of the American people to get federal spending under control and vote for a sensible reduction of spending by opposing the previous question. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from New York is recognized.